Does the U.S. government learn from the Chinese government? We're going to answer that question right now in this video, and I believe the answer is yes. Case in point, this is from MIT Technology Review. A previously unreported project is intended to improve how facial recognition algorithms track children over time. So before we get into the article very quickly, most of you know that China is at the vanguard of facial recognition. Why? Because it surveils all of its citizens and visitors. This is widely known and well documented in literature and video. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security, DHS, is looking into ways it might use facial recognition technology to track the identities of migrant children. So let me say one thing right now. This is not a political video. This is about AI and the uses of AI and whether they're desirable or not, like everything else we do on this channel. This is not a political video or question. It is simply about how AI is starting to be used. The technology is intended to track down to the infant as they age, according to John Boyd, Assistant Director of the Department's Office of Biometric Identity Management, OBIM, and we're going to abbreviate that from now on. Love these government acronyms. Where a key part of his role is to research and develop future biometric identity services for the government. The key question for OBIM is, if we pick up someone from Panama at the southern border at age 4, say, and then pick them up at age 6, are we going to recognize them as the same child? FRT, facial recognition technology, has traditionally not been applied to children, largely because training data sets of real children's faces are few and far between. Why? Such limitations reflect the significant sensitivities regarding privacy and consent when it comes to minors. So children are not of legal age to give consent, but there's other aspects to this as well, like parental consent. We'll talk about that. 339,234 children arrived at the U.S.-Mexico border in 2022. If the face prints of even 1% of those children were in OBIM's Craniofacial Structural Progressive Initiative, the resulting data set would dwarf nearly all existing data sets of real children's faces used for aging research. So suffice it to say, there's legitimate uses of this kind of technology, one of which we'll talk about shortly. Boyd told MIT Technology Review that to the best of his knowledge, the agency has not yet started collecting data under the program. He could only confirm that his office is funding it. After publication of this article by MIT Technology Review, DHS denied that it had plans to collect facial images from minors under age 14. Boyd described recent rulemaking at some DHS components or sub-offices that have removed age restrictions on the collection of biometric data. DHS uses various forms of technology to execute its mission, including some biometric capabilities, DHS said. DHS ensures all technologies, regardless of type, are operated under the established authorities and within the scope of the law. We are committed to protecting the privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties of all individuals who may be subject to the technology we use to keep the nation safe and secure. So quick side note, this is not a political comment, it's a factual comment. The government has previously used private data without consent. That's extremely well documented. DHS does not collect facial images from minors under 14 and has no current plans to do so for either operational or research purposes, walking back Boyd's comments. Close observers of DHS that we spoke with were unaware of any new policies allowing biometric data collection of children under 14. Well, no one was aware of the other illegal use of private data previously occurring either. Again, a factual statement, not political. That tracks, said one former CBP official. That's Customs and Border Patrol. He says every center he visited had biometric identity collection and everybody was going through it. So this guy who used to work for the Border Patrol is saying they're doing it, despite the denial. The reports of CBP, as well as DHS more broadly, expanding the use of facial recognition technology to track migrant children is another stride toward a surveillance state and should be a concern to everyone who values privacy, said Justin Krakoff, Deputy Communications Director for Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon. Government officials are acknowledging this is happening and saying that it's inappropriate. Beyond concerns about privacy, transparency, and accountability, some experts also worry about biometric technologies targeting a population that has little recourse to provide or withhold consent. What do they mean by that? If you arrive at a border and you are faced with the impossible choice of either get into the country if you give us your biometrics or you don't get in, that completely vitiates informed consent. So, side note, recently I mentioned I took a trip overseas to another country. At the border of that country, they took my facial recognition and I had no choice. It was either give it to them or not get into the country. That is not informed consent. And it's logical to conclude that governments around the world are creating these massive databases of how people are moving now around the globe, particularly by air travel, but at any border crossing, and ultimately will share that data. Why do I say that? Because that's the way it's always gone historically. As they say, the past is prologue. And again, video is about AI. So what are we talking about here? Do we as private citizens want this to be happening when we show up at a border after a plane flight and will be refused entry if we don't do it? That puts individuals in a very difficult position. And as they noted, children are not equipped to consider the long-term implications of this kind of activity. So OBIM, the Office of Biometric Identity Management, previously known as the U.S. Visitor and Immigrant Status Indicator Technology Program, which is abbreviated U.S. Visit, and as my viewers know, I hate all these acronyms, but it's important for this point, was created after 9/11 with the specific mandate of collecting biometric data. Initially, only fingerprints and photographs from all non-U.S. citizens sought to enter the country. We'll talk more about that in a second, that point of citizens versus non-citizens. And let me say for the record that I don't want terrorists roaming freely around the globe at all. So the question is, how do you balance the need for safety and security with the need for privacy and civil rights? It's a difficult question. Since then, DHS has been collecting face prints, iris scans, and even DNA, among other modalities. It is also testing new ways of gathering this data, including through contactless fingerprint collection, which is currently deployed at 5 sites. I had no idea that was possible. Since 2023, CBP has been using a mobile app, CBP One, which there's been a lot of press about, for asylum seekers to submit biometric data even before they enter the United States. The app has been riddled with problems, including technical glitches and facial recognition algorithms that are not able to recognize dark-skinned people. This has been in the news thousands of times over the last few years. Then, just after crossing into the United States, migrants submit to collection of more biometric data, including DNA. CBP has added 1.5 million DNA profiles, primarily from migrants crossing the border, to law enforcement databases since it began collecting DNA from any person in CBP custody to fingerprinting in January 2020. What does that very long sentence mean? It means that DHS is collecting all this information and sharing it with law enforcement agencies nationwide in the United States and probably internationally through Interpol. Generally, these programs only require information from individuals aged 14 to 79. Although, as the CBP former official noted, they're scanning everyone at the border of any age. This would make it appear contradictory if DHS were beginning to collect biometric data of children under 14. Neither Boyd nor DHS's media office would confirm which specific policy changes he was referring to in his presentation, though MIT Technology Review has identified a 2017 memo by then Secretary of Homeland Security John F. Kelly that encouraged DHS components to remove age as a basis for determining when to collect biometrics. So the DHS, like every government agency, has an Office of the Inspector General, OIG, which is meant to review the activities of that government entity and publicly report them and attempt to stop inappropriate uses of things that government agencies aren't supposed to be doing, but they don't have any real power to do that. How do I know that? I have a good friend who used to work for an OIG's office. The OIG audit also found a number of fundamental issues related to DHS's oversight of biometric data collection and use, including that its 10-year strategic framework for biometrics covering 2015 to 2025 did not accurately reflect the current state of biometrics across the department. And here again is an opportunity to make a very important point that AI is an exponential technology. All the technologies surrounding it, like sensors and robotics, are also exponential, and government policy cannot keep up with the rate of change of exponential technologies. It cannot. So things happen in the interim. Boyd explained that the initiative is meant to advance the development of effective FRT algorithms. Of course it is. They're trying to make these algorithms better and better and better to lower the failure rate from what was roughly 65% accuracy a year ago and improve that accuracy rate to 95+%. That's a stated goal of many companies in this technology area. Driven by high-profile cases of missing children, there has long been an interest in understanding how children's faces age. At the same time, there have been technical challenges to doing so, both preceding FRT and with it. So again, there are legitimate uses of this technology, and that's one of them, clearly, to find missing children after they've aged. At its core, facial recognition identifies individuals by comparing the geometry of various facial features in an original face print with subsequent images. Based on this comparison, a facial recognition algorithm assigns a percentage likelihood that there is a match. That's how FRT works. But as children grow and develop, their bone structure changes significantly, making it difficult for facial recognition algorithms to identify them over time. There is a dearth of high-quality data sets of children's faces with verifiable ages, right? Because if stuff that's scraped off the internet is of low resolution quality and has no age attached to it, so it's trying to figure that out as opposed to documented age over time. We're going to hear about that right now. What we're trying to do is to get a large data set of known individuals, Boyd tells MIT Technology Review, where they can be certain about the provenance of the data. That means quality of the data, where it came from, and how accurate it is, which is important for any AI. Obviously, for stuff just scraped off the internet, you have no provenance of the data. There is also synthetic data, which someone else I know is currently using at their work right now to train AI algorithms. Synthetic data is considered more privacy preserving because it's made up data with particular characteristics, say a medical condition. But it too has limitations, says Stephanie Shuckers, director of the Center for Identification Technology Research. CITR, another acronym, help us. You can test things with only the generated data, Shuckers explains, but the question remains, would you get similar results to real data? Which is exactly the problem the person I know who's using synthetic data is facing at his work. Shuckers' team at Sitter has taken another approach, an ongoing longitudinal study of a cohort of 231 elementary and middle school students. They have found that the open source face recognition models they tested can in fact successfully recognize children 3 to 4 years after they were initially enrolled. So did you catch that? There are open source, high accuracy facial recognition technologies floating around publicly, which anyone can use, by the way, any private company, any nonprofit, any government, anybody can use this open source stuff. But the conditions of this study are not easily replicable at scale. Why? The study images are taken from a controlled environment. All the participants are volunteers. The researchers have consent from parents and the subjects themselves. So these pictures are taken in a very controlled way. This is why DHS is doing this, because the environmental conditions, meaning the circumstances where the picture is taken, is always the same at these checkpoints. So the data set can be very, very consistent in that way. Boyd says OBIM takes privacy considerations seriously, and that we don't share data with commercial industries, however they do with other law enforcement agencies. And here we go. Still, OBIM has approximately 140 government partners which it shares and receives information with, according to a report by the Government Accountability Office, GAO, which has criticized it for poorly documenting its agreements, meaning the GAO is saying there's no way of knowing what's happening with this data that's being shared. OBIM's findings regarding the accuracy of FRT for children over time could nevertheless influence how and when the rest of the government collects biometric data. So again, when you arrive even to a U.S. airport as a U.S. citizen, they're collecting your pictures and biometric data with basically no consent. You can withhold consent, but then you can't even enter your own country. I'll give an opinion about that in a moment. That this technology would target people who are offered fewer privacy protections than would be afforded to U.S. citizens is just part of a wider trend of using people from the developing world, whether they are migrants coming to the border or civilians in war zones, to help improve technologies. So it is well known and well documented that the U.S. government's position on everything, especially on technologies and how they're used, differentiates between U.S. citizens and non-citizens. In other words, there are no rules about how any information can be collected or used from non-U.S. citizens by U.S. government agencies, including more than the DHS, FBI, CIA, etc. So check this out. In fact, Boyd previously helped advance the Department of Defense's biometric systems in Iraq and Afghanistan, where he acknowledged that individuals were subject to different rules than would have been applied in many other contexts, despite the incredibly high stakes. What does that mean, incredibly high stakes? It is a war zone. Biometric data collected in these war zones in some areas from every fighting age male was used to identify and target insurgents, and being misidentified means death. These projects subsequently played a substantial role in influencing the expansion of biometric data collection by the Department of Defense, which is now happening globally. Again, my point about massive data sets being created and ultimately shared around the world. Borders are the perfect laboratory for tech experimentation because oversight is weak, discretion is baked into the decisions that get made, and it allows the state to experiment in ways that it wouldn't be allowed to do in other ways. or places. And they always save the most important point in all these articles for the very last sentence. Just because it happens at the border doesn't mean that that's where it's going to stay. So this is an extremely important video about AI and what are proper uses of AI and what are not. Whether a use is or isn't proper needs widespread discussion in an open environment and ultimately legislation or court decisions determining appropriate and non-appropriate uses. So what are the three big takeaways from this article? Number one, most importantly, biometric information is now being completed on all of us who travel to other countries unwillingly because there's no viable way to refuse consent for collection of this information. As I said, you show up at a border, you refuse, you get rejected, and you don't get to go on your trip. That's not consent. Why do I know that? In addition to being a CFO, I am a lawyer. So legally, that is not consent. Number two, we as citizens need to really consider how we want AI and the associated technologies like sensors, which equals FRT, to be used, when it's used and when it's not used. Now, there obviously will be disagreement from person to person. This is why open discussion is needed in Congress and appropriate legislation needs to be passed about all this stuff. And number three, a point made in the article that I've repeatedly made, this is an exponential technology moving way faster than the legislative or legal process. And that puts everyone in a bind because the cat is out of the bag before anything can be done about it. And then what does that mean? How do you, even if legislation is passed later, how do you enforce restrictions on use of these technologies when the technology and databases are already out there for a long time? That becomes very, very difficult to enforce. So there's a lot to think about here. And on a topic like this, because this is not a political channel, I do not give an answer. This is up to the people. It's up to people to speak to their Congress people, representatives and senators, about what they think about all this. But this requires civic action, which means picking up the phone, or every representative or senator has a contact form where you can register your concern to them online. That's really the efficient way to do it. So I urge you to be active about AI, sensors, and robotics, because the general public is the one who are going to be affected by all this, not the political or other elites. They will not be affected. It will be the everyday folks who will be affected. So thanks so much for tuning in. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, and share. Also, please support us on Patreon. We need your financial support. Thanks so much. Take care. See you next time. Bye.